companies in Silicon Valley, I think they're essentially racketeering. They're working with each other. They're working with the Democratic Party to racketeer, to commit fraud, to influence elections. And I don't think that it's even legally acceptable. And I think that it's perfectly fine for the government to bust that up.
That's a Republican idea. The entire idea that we should bust up monopolies, we should the trust, antitrust laws. That's all from the era of the Republican Party, from the turn of the 19th,
Yeah,
the
it's like
18,
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt. That's all. That's all the 1900s regulations. That's all Teddy Roosevelt. The Democrats were never for that shit. They always wanted, because they always wanted um, a monopoly so they could have power over the worker, the farm. Free trade in America was passed on the behest of the Democratic, what used to be the Democratic, I guess, fiefdom of farms. King Cotton. One of the reasons why we had the Civil War was not slavery per se, but the idea that King Cotton, the agricultural business and elite, they wanted to have free trade with England and Europe, and the Republicans didn't want that. They wanted to have tariffs to protect American businesses uh, that were arising in this age of industrialization, which was just happening right then and there. So the Democrats were always like this. They were always, sometimes it switches around, the ideology switches back and forth. The Democrats have always been the internationalist, the globalist party, and that goes back to the slavery times too. Um, uh, the ones that were always trying to balance shit out was always the Republican Party, for the longest time, and I think that's how everyone says that the party switched places with Jim Crow, and then Democrats became Republican, Republicans became Democrat. That's all. Just throw that all out. It's really just the establishment in
Yeah,
America
I
of
don't.
who wants to be a globalist and who wants to be a
They
nationalist. That's
they
all
and
it
they
is.
usually they pinpoint the party switching places in the '60s, and you know what? Just because LBJ passed civil rights legislation and also legislation for handouts, like the Great Society program and welfare, and then also behind closed doors was calling black people the N word and saying that he was bribing them for their votes. I don't think that that means the party switched places.
No,
That's
it
just
didn't.
a that's an interesting point of something happening in history, but that doesn't mean the parties should switch places. We know that he was making a very cynical move
Well, correlation is not
because
causation.
up to that point, let's say we're going with the narrative that the parties switched places. That means the Democrats were the party of racism and the KKK up until the mid '60s, and guess what? When he says that stuff behind closed doors, he's still the same party, isn't he?
He is, but in reality, again, causation is not correlation. Just because that happened with the civil rights legislation, and then when Nixon ran, the party switched. He won the South. That does not mean that there was a sort of switcheroo. That's actually absolutely not the case. It's just it could be a coincidence. There's other factors involved. One of these factors that is involved is the Democrats started embracing. Uh, these weird ideologies that didn't sit well with a lot of people in America.
Well,
You don't
they
have
went
the
too far left with
yeah,
in '68 with the Nixon election. That's why he won in a landslide.
yeah,
Even though there was a huge counterculture movement, they just went too far left, and then there was just a backlash against it, and Nixon won in a landslide.
yeah. And people forget this, but the Republicans used to be the party of the anti-war, and we just assume because of the Vietnam War, all these
Yeah, well, the
protesters.
Democrats started it, and the Republicans ended it.
Yeah, like everyone kind of. The Republicans were anti-war, but they
That's
were
why
also
LBJ didn't run again. By the way, I mean he might have
yeah.
passed that legislation that a lot of liberals like, but he didn't. He didn't run again. He could have,
Well,
but it was.
well,
I think it's because he was too. The Vietnam War was too much of an anchor around his neck.
it was, and it goes back to being that the Democrats were internationalists. Back then, being an internationalist meant all these Democrats wanting to use the American military to intervene all over the world, including my own country of Greece, my birth country. the dictatorship in Greece was not imposed on by a Republican administration. Lyndon Baines Johnson um, had the CIA overthrow the Greek government and install a right wing junta on the fear that Greece was going to become more friendly towards the Eastern Bloc and the Russians because they were about to elect a socialist. Uh, so all this internationalism, all these juntas overseas and all that, that's all the Democrats. And then Nixon comes aboard and the Democrats are able to say, no, it's not us, it's Nixon because, look at that evil Kissinger and whatever. And they kind of want to ignore, they kind of want to ignore their own history of being like
But
the
the
party of
military
oppression.
industrial complex seems to have more power over foreign policy than the president does, even though the president has more power on paper or whatever.
Yeah. So this switching of parties, the Democrats were always the party of internationalism, or what's internationalism? Sometimes internationalism was the United States being involved everywhere overseas. Nowadays, internationalism is the United States facilitating some sort of one worldism, whatever the fuck that means.